Alright, hi everyone. We're going to see if we can get the art review done for the Halloween videos. I'm just opening up my laptop so I can get my notes up as well. I think it's also appropriate that I'm wearing orange this time because, you know, Halloween and pumpkins and stuff. So look at me, I am the pumpkin now. Alright, so obviously this is the Spooktober challenge that happened on our Discord server a little while back. I'm sorry it's taken me like a couple of weeks to get around to reviewing it. It's just I've been quite busy and these take a while to prepare. So yeah, if I just disable my face there. First of all, we have Agniv. So this is RenderRides on YouTube. You may know their YouTube channel. Now, I'm not sure if they did this artwork specifically for our Discord challenge. They said that they were coming up with a similar idea around the same time. So I don't know whether I would actually consider this as being specifically for the challenge. They did also do a video tutorial on their YouTube video for this as well, where they did not mention the Discord challenge. So we'll see whether I consider it for like the final Hall of Fame. But it's a lovely piece of artwork, very high quality, very well made. If you actually watch the video, they will like explain the breakdown of how it was done. It's very cute, like nicely styled, color corrected as well, because there's been some post effects going over the top, including things like the embers, and the lighting's been like rebalanced afterwards as well. There were some cool techniques employed, such as using curves with icospheres, like being arrayed along the curves to make the fairy lights, and using the random value of the object info node for getting the different colors and emission strengths of the lighting. A lot of these objects come from Sketchfab as well, so there's not a lot of manual modeling, although I believe there was for things like the sign here. They took an image and then basically cut it out with the knife tool and then solidified it, subdivided and beveled it using modifiers. And also the cloth was done with Marvelous Designer. So overall, I would say there's not too much to comment on because it just like it looks lovely anyway. However, nothing is without fault, and I'd say on the cloth you can definitely see where the polygons are. Like if you're used to looking at cloth objects made in 3D, it becomes quite apparent that they are made in 3D software. Generally, you know, you could solve some of that obviousness by subdividing it a bit more and just smoothing it out with some cloth, but it is just always a little bit difficult. It's more apparent around the edges here. We can start to draw the triangles. But yeah, overall, that's just only like a slight complaint. I guess it's also quite apparent down there as well. But you know, everything else is pretty lovely. Although I will say maybe this kind of gives the vibes of like an American scene, considering that it's English trick or treat. You know, they're all very Halloween obsessed over there. But this road is missing a sidewalk, I would say. Just a general sidewalk to walk down, you know, where you'd see mailboxes as well. It kind of just, it cuts straight to dirt, which just doesn't really seem appropriate. I mean, I'm sure there are many roads in America that are like that anyway, but I just feel like that might add something as well. But yeah, thanks Agniv. Let's move on to the next one. So we have AnaxondA. I'm not too sure how you pronounce that, or how you say it. That's the username. AnaxondA with a capital A, I believe. So this is quite a sweet one, quite lovely and mostly silhouette based, like different cutouts. There are some areas in particular that I like about this. I mean, I like the house with the, you know, emissive windows there. Jack-o'-lantern's quite cute. The raven isn't necessarily standing on it, raven or crow. I don't know, the cat's pretty cute, although you can maybe see where things have been cut out a bit. I do like the moon here with the bats. The bats look pretty cool. And I always love some emissive bloom. Stylistically, very consistent. I like that. Although maybe the text is a bit dark because it's up against a darker background, so maybe slightly hard to read. But overall, I think it's quite a nice one. Also, maybe I guess the fog is quite abruptly cut off there. Maybe a bit too consistent as well. But I like at least as well that the color palette's quite restricted. So yeah, pretty cute one. So thank you for submitting that. Next up we have August. Now on the surface this one is quite a lovely, you know, nature scene until you look closely and then you realize there's a ghostly phantom figure. That is quite freaky because it's kind of like, you know, uncanny. You can't necessarily see exactly what they are, which, you know, I think kind of adds to that fear of the unknown. But there's also something freaky about like having a very pleasant scene and then not realizing that something is staring at you until later on. Like that's always the really cool thing about all these ghost hunter pictures, you know, where people take pictures of houses and then it looks like there's someone staring at them from out the window, and that's always very unnerving. So yeah, I think it's good. I like that they're just kind of just like offset randomly next to a tree, just staring over. In terms of any critique, I would say the image kind of suffers from that. Of course, we know it's 3D by the lighting vibe, where everything feels kind of dull, and I guess like it just generally feels like there's not as much light in the ambient space. Also, I think maybe it's lit down a bit by the grass and plant objects because you can just kind of tell from looking at them. Again, the lighting cuts off very quickly. The plants look like 2D cutouts, although I do appreciate that they've tried to break up like repetition in the ground, so that's pretty nice. And also the general noise. But like other than that, yeah, I like the vibe, really kind of playing into that psychological aspect. So thank you for submitting. So of course, next we have Donna. No comment. I mean, it's a brilliant idea, brilliant execution as well. The sculpting is done really well. The texturing as well is actually like really impressive. So well done for all of that. There's actually not much to comment on. Of course, with faces, eyelashes are always a little bit hit or miss, like quite difficult to do, but seems all right. I mean, eyes, the water looks pretty good there. Quality wise, all very good and unnerving. The only thing I would comment on, maybe everything else looks pretty good except the bed, I would say looks like just a stone slab. So maybe some creases perhaps, because obviously there's quite a heavy weight. There's a body on this bed. So maybe just a bit of creasing to show that there's actually, you know, pressure being applied. Maybe a bit similar to how the pillow has some creasing. But yeah, that would be the only comment I would make. It looks like you've artificially added noise over the top, which seems pretty good because it's quite consistent. So yeah, actually not much else to comment on. Looks good. So Emarco's one is actually a video. I don't know whether to play the whole thing. Maybe I should. There is a jump scare at the end, just to pre-warn you. So I don't know how loud that'll be. I'll turn the audio down a bit. So what they've said is, school project I recently made. We recorded everything on a green screen set at school and used After Effects for keying and rendered in Eevee. We took inspiration from several medias like The Backrooms, Cry of Fear, The Ring, and Yellow Wallpaper. The animated wallpaper was made by my friend, who also did the green screen footages. Post-production was done in After Effects. Due to short time constraints and requirements, ended up with some places being too rushed. Character model at the end are from Mixamo that I quickly repainted to look edgy. So yeah, it's quite an interesting style, quite glitchy, a bit surreal. I like the stretching here. Kind of makes you feel a bit unnerved. I was wondering how they did this kind of animation thing, but I expect that's like the green screen element. So yeah, after the noise, we kind of end up in like a first-person perspective here. I quite like this. It's like these vintage, unnerving games. I like the filter. There's a little bit of like VHS kind of tearing going down. And yeah, this is more of like a Backrooms vibe, of course. I kind of like that because you don't really know what's coming. Yeah, a little bit of storytelling. Things might be a bit rough around the edges in 3D, but it looks okay. Oh no, we're being chased. And then this is where the jump scare happens, so just a bit of pre-warning. So yeah, a little bit edgy at the end. I have very mixed opinions about jump scares, to be honest, because I hate them in like films and games and stuff, because I feel like a lot of the effort in like psychological horror is being able to terrify you without doing much. I feel like that's like a good sign of like really well developed atmospherics, for example, and implied things implied that you're being looked at, you're being watched, things changing, like very subtle changes that can terrify you. I always think like there's a really intricate skill in developing that. And I feel like a lot of films like, you know, the Conjuring series managed to do that without the jump scares they employ anyway. So, and then I also feel like, you know, with jump scares, it's what people remember. They'll remember, oh, there's a jump scare here, and then it kind of like overshadows the rest of the effort that was put into it, if that makes sense. But like obviously people can disagree with that. So yeah, I mean, it's quite interesting. I like the variety that's been put into this, and that it kind of tells a story. You know, a storytelling element is a good thing to have. But remember that the artwork in this challenge, at least for the Hall of Fame, is supposed to be made with the intention of being made for the challenge specifically. And you did say in the description, school project I recently made. So if this was made for school, then I may not include it in the Hall of Fame, but I still think it's a pretty cool one, so thank you for submitting. Okay, next up we have Garry Gatling. I like that name, Gatling. So their description of this is, when the torch is lit, it's too late. Behold. So it's a little bit hard to tell exactly what's going on in this, but I guess from my interpretation, we have like a hallway of some kind, and then there are pillars which have broken down and are now kind of scattering, and then there's this creature thing, which I suppose is coming to get us. If I had to kind of interpret this, I would say maybe this is an eye of some kind, and then these are like tentacle-like appendages kind of coming at us. You know, quite a nice idea. I think that maybe the reason why it's a bit hard to tell what's going on initially is because, you know, the shapes are quite messy and maybe a bit undefined. But I suppose maybe that could be helped with some like extra geometric details, or even some more like texturing effort, because it seems like there isn't pretty much texturing on many details. I can see polygons. But that's fair, you know. I mean, in terms of stylization, you don't really need texturing for anything if you're good and like creative with the lighting and color. I guess that's another thing as well. Like the lighting is kind of flat in a lot of places. But I like, again, like the storytelling element, because you have, you know, added the description there. When the torch is lit, it's too late. I like that. Pretty nice. Also, there is some detail here? It looks like kind of scratches maybe, or is it just like a lighting reflection? The only reason I think this is an eye is because though this may be like a lighting reflection other than a pupil / iris, it seems like you've put some extra sculpting detail around this area, which makes me think it is more like an eye. So yeah, pretty interesting. I wonder what like the entire creature or mask looks like as a whole. Thank you for submitting, Gary. All right, next up we have an entry. It's another video from Hili, who's also one of my patrons. And because they're a patron, I'll give them some more attention. Hoi hoi hoi. So it seems like on this one, they're really playing on my submechanophobia because I have a bit of a fear of underwater man-made objects, but more specifically things like shipwrecks and stuff. But let's just have a quick watch. So that little bit at the end, it did freak me out a bit the first time I watched this. That's kind of really disgusting and unnerving. Like some kind of eldritch horror creature just like immediately going whoosh, you know, right at you at the end. So yeah, this one did kind of freak me out a bit. Mostly again, because as I said, I've got like a little bit of a fear of underwater man-made things. It's not really to do with like what it is. It's more to do with the shaping and the dirtiness of it and not wanting to touch it, like in the dark, and the scale of it as well, like feeling small next to something huge. There are some interesting details in this animation, like the particle shooting away with a sound effect there, kind of indicating maybe something is close. I like that. I always like particulate details like this. I see you've got some lensing going on with like the chromatic aberration. One thing I would say is maybe the rocks are kind of under detailed. It doesn't necessarily look like a seabed, although I suppose it's quite difficult to capture a seabed. The rocks start to appear rather suddenly here. So I wonder if like some more effort could be put into that. I like maybe again like a slight storytelling element with the decals on the piece of wreckage, although perhaps the riveting details feel a bit flat, like a flat texture. But yeah, with this weird arm coming along, the motion blur on that's pretty good as well. Actually looks, yeah, pretty good. So yeah, I do quite like this one. Made me feel a bit unnerved. The next one we have here is by Jishu Artz. So this is quite a cool one. A general freaky clown artwork with a coulrophobia written on the back there, which means the fear of clowns. So I figure that's quite clever. It's pretty classic. I like the backlighting. And are these like children trapped in the balloons as well? Seems like an interesting idea for a horror film, you know? The clown that traps children in balloons. Make sure they don't float away. It also kind of reminds me of like Killing Floor 2, because I'm pretty sure in that game there are some like evil clown creatures that, you know, have this kind of vibe going on. I'll see if I can get a picture. Killing Floor 2 clowns. Pretty good game, but like, yeah, here we go. So you can see the that kind of vibe going on. So yeah, I wonder like maybe to give some critique, I guess like the style maybe feels a bit inconsistent between like this balloon element. The lighting makes it feel like I can't really interpret the depth necessarily. Like, are these just 2D? Are they 3D? Who knows? Texture details, I don't know. Things maybe just feel a bit inconsistent. Again, like lighting on the hair here, but not on the scalp. The text does maybe feel a little bit out of place because it's so clean. It just seems like it's been photoshopped on after the fact. Also, is that maybe some denoising? So I guess like a lot of it's just like cleanliness. Also, it'd be nice to have an environment perhaps for the clown. But I suppose these are all things that could be done in a different version. But thank you very much for submitting. Let's move on to the next one. So LT Leotard, or Lieutenant Leotard, again, another patron. Thank you very much for the support. This is a very, very cute one, and there's quite a lot to discover in this. I like artworks that have, you know, many things to discover. Looks like we have some floating ghosts, some skillimabobs, some other ghosts, an astronaut or Among Us type character. I like the different faces on the ghost back here. Look, there's quite a, I don't know if he's happy or like kind of like evil happy, you know, with those eyes, but yeah, that's quite funny. I like that. This guy's a bit sus. I don't know why he's got a pirate hat and a trident, but you know, not going to judge. One thing I'll say about the artwork is the ground has some interesting detail with these rocks and leaves, but the detail feels inconsistent between the pieces because like this candle, you know, very polygonal, very simple compared to the detail of the scene. So it feels like some things are being slapped together a bit, but you know, it's still quite a fun one. More like a diorama piece. Skeleton poses seem a bit simple as well. And wait, are these barrels? What are the barrels doing here? Barrels. So yeah, maybe like a conflict of detail or a conflict of styles, but otherwise, you know, quite a friendly piece. Thank you for submitting. Next up we have Marton. This one is pretty good quality. It's another short one, so let's take a quick look. Yeah, pretty nice. I like the vintage style. They said that's what they were going for. Bubbles in vats, they look pretty good. I can see the glass there. There's a bit of duplication. Sculpted, the creatures seem pretty nice as well. There are a couple of scenes in this I really like. So I like this is kind of offset. Barry and Larry, handwritten, very nice. Little smiley face. Cool little notes and storytelling. I like that when we're looking at, when our eyes are drawn over to the note here, we're actually looking kind of into the mouth of the creature. So that's also quite unnerving. You can see like all the frilly teeth there. So I appreciate the cinematic nature of these shots. Maybe this scene lets it down a little bit, because when we have a look at the environment here, this is quite basic in the way that it's all very kind of rectangular, seems, you know, quite simply modeled out. Whereas obviously when we go back to scenes like this, everything feels much more kind of high frequency and more cinematic, you know. So this one kind of gives it a bit like a low poly game vibe instead. But other than that, I really like it. Yeah, I like the effort that's gone into this. You've also kind of added like all these extra post video effects with like the tearing through the screen, the film detail. So yeah, overall, a pretty good one. Pretty well thought out. Thank you for sharing. Okay, next up we have Mel. This is quite a freaky, cool idea of like a kind of eldritch horror-y type thing coming through the eye. Only comments I would make would be the skin doesn't really look like skin. It's quite hard and crusty, although, you know, maybe that's just the nature of whatever happens to this person. Perhaps more geometric detail as well, because, you know, it's quite a simple transition here into the eye, and then the eyelashes kind of just stick out. But like we said with Donna's artwork as well, eyelashes are very difficult to get right anyway. But yeah, it just seems like, you know, more geometry would help with shaping this out. But it does look like you've done some nice post-process work as well, because it seems like the color's been adjusted. I do like kind of how this tentacle thing looks here. Kind of freaky. Again, is this some additional noise over the top? Again, yeah, kind of similar to Donna's one actually. In regards to that, I mean, let's actually bring them both up. Do you see what I mean? Like there's a kind of similar style going on here in terms of the processing. So yeah, actually quite interesting. I like that. Only thing I would say is that like with the eye bit here, it's actually quite difficult to see what is happening. What is this white bit? Like, because when I first looked at that, I thought, is that actually like a structure of some kind? But no, I think it's just lighting. It's kind of interrupting like the geometry underneath, so it's quite hard to tell what's going on in this bit. Otherwise though, quite nice. But again, like distribution of detail or rather consistency, we've got a hyper detailed tentacle here. Maybe some areas of rest along there might be good. But again, like comparing this to like the surface of the skin here, seems like something is lacking. But overall, quite nice. Thank you for submitting. Next up we have Microwave, and the main focus of this is the ghost or the spirit or the phantom, and I really like the effect here on the, well, what I suppose we would call the bed sheet. Yeah, this interesting like emissive Fresnel. I really like that. I haven't really seen many effects like that before. And I suppose that's good because like the ghost is the main carrying point of this artwork. It's the main focal point. Other areas of the artwork, it just feels like there's not really much happening in the background there, so we don't get much of a sense of depth for the environment. It's also quite noisy, but again, you know, that's expected, especially if you're dealing with volumetrics and emissive sources. Also, the scale maybe feels a bit off with the trees, like they're quite stumpy, and the grass is quite large by comparison. Feels like the scales are maybe a bit off, but you know, and the simplified geometry of the branches. But otherwise, again, like I quite like the main carrying point here, so I think it's quite a nice one to look at. So yes, thanks for submitting, Microwave. I do also appreciate like the blurring around the edges, and again, a kind of subtle chromatic shift going on. Next up is NeonNight. So this is another interesting graveyard scene. I like that there's some more detail in the actual gravestone. What would we call these? Like, what's their official name? These kind of monument or statues. I noticed that the film is actually different. I mean, like the grain is different from the other ones we've seen, although from what I know, kind of like the color ones are usually more digitized, but this doesn't look like regular rendering grain, so I wonder if you've added this over the top. The consistency makes me think that it has been, but that's quite interesting. I guess this is a creature. Also, like the torch light here, or the flashlight, reminds me of like these, you know, like 2010s Unity games like Slender Man and other things like that. Does anyone remember those types of games? But like in Unity, people would take a regular spotlight and stick it on the first person controller, so everyone would like walk around in a dark scene with a spotlight, because like there was a big horror game wave going on back then. So it just gives me those kinds of vibes. But yeah, it's quite cool. I like it, but maybe something a bit more interpretable, I suppose, for the creature, because it's actually quite hard to tell what's going on. Like, is that neck coming up there? So yeah, also I suppose there's a lot of like dark dark space around here with not much going on. Maybe I suppose a lesson could be taken from like August's one, where we just bring that back up. In something otherwise inconspicuous, something more terrifying can be interpreted. So I suppose I'd like to see more graveyard scenes where the graveyard looks otherwise fine, but upon closer inspection, you notice something is very off. And I wonder if this one's maybe a bit too obvious, but you know, otherwise I quite like it. I do appreciate that more detail has actually been put into the graveyard here than other scenes. So I appreciate that extra effort, including even like the hedges in the background there, the light falls on it, trees look higher detail than some other pieces. Ground detail is less consistent as well, which is pretty nice there. So yeah, thanks for sharing. Next up, Prequod. You will have some very interesting usernames. So this is simple but effective. It's a nice jack-o'-lantern scene, probably quite a large one as well, given what I think the scale of the grass is here. Unless it's just like a regular sized jack-o'-lantern, but the grass is very cut. But I'm going to run with the idea that it's a giant jack-o'-lantern. I like that you've tried to give it some good detail as well, despite it being like a relatively simplistic scene. So you can see some of the randomized noisy bump there. But I do appreciate that it kind of feels more fibrous on the inside. That's pretty good. I wonder if the cutouts are a bit too sharp and simplistic, because it does look like it's just been booleaned out. So maybe if there was some sculpting effort to kind of randomize the edges there, might make it feel a bit more handmade. Maybe perhaps some extra detail on the inside, but something that would not overpower the lighting too much. There's also a lot of empty space around the pumpkin, and the volumetrics are consistent. I wonder if adding some noise to the fog, or maybe like a gradient of some kind where it gets less dense as it goes up. Perhaps for something more cinematic, because this has given me a bit of an idea, like a large pumpkin in a field, but imagine we're kind of looking through an undergrowth into an open field, and then there's this large pumpkin, maybe slightly ajar, maybe with some like roots kind of feeding into it, kind of like looking out into the open space. So I guess there are like more things that can be done with the idea, but yeah, I like it. So Yeets-A-Lot, this one has a nice vibe to it. Seems like an almost well-rounded piece of artwork. I'd say almost because while it's very like nice on the surface and it looks like it'd be like a good phone background, I can see just a few inconsistencies, more specifically with like the larger lines on the material. It looks like they've been kind of cut off or segmented, maybe due to like a scattering method or something. I'm not too sure what the texture is, but also, you know, they wrap around the object quite flatly despite the color or the shading indicating that they have some depth to them. So yeah, I wonder if something differently can be done there. I imagine it wouldn't be too complex to make something in geonodes that would actually create curves that grow around the object. And maybe I'll try that with the next version of PyGen. Something like that could add some extra like physicality to it that might make it, I guess, feel a bit more tangible. But I do really like the vibe of it. You know, the restricted color, the style, the flowers or the roses rather kind of growing out the skull. I think it has some nice features. Yeah, I like this. Skaros has decided to create everyone's worst nightmare. Tentacles coming up through the toilet. Thankfully no one's on it. And I'll say it's quite well processed. I like the volumetrics. You can notice that with the shadowing happening under the toilet bowl there. The lighting is quite good. I like that it's coming up from a general soft source. The tentacles seem kind of well lit, although maybe a higher resolution would be nice. The chromatic aberration is fairly strong. I would say maybe, I can't tell if there's a wall there. It looks like there may be some skirting. If there is, it's not very obvious because the tiles are quite well lit by comparison. It would be nice to see maybe a bit more of a wall there, or at least some kind of other backing detail that does not overtake the volumetrics too much. But I suppose it can be a difficult thing to balance. Perhaps also if this was like a, you know, like a cubicle. If you had like some cubicle walls going down, it might make it feel slightly more claustrophobic, and I think that might add to like the fear of the tentacles in some way. So yeah, maybe something like that. But overall, I quite like it. Yeah, I like the color grading and the grimy texturing. So yeah, pretty good. So from Wezzy Alex Carter, we have a very painterly style of artwork. And it seems quite interesting because given the lighting here affecting the painterly bump, it looks like a photograph of an art painting rather than a natural rendering. So if that's what you were going for, then I guess you've achieved that quite well. The pumpkin is cute. There is texture detail, although I don't know how like detailed that texturing is because obviously the painterly takes over that, but I suppose that's a pretty good technique as well. I wonder, is that some extra brushstrokes that have been added afterwards to kind of like try and sell the idea? If so, I think that's quite interesting. Or perhaps is that like planes that are done and then rendered after? I've seen people experimenting with different painterly styles like with Blender and other software before. One thing I will say, maybe in terms of the framing, there's quite a lot of empty space here. I wonder if like more could be done to kind of like compose this in a more complete way, so like more's being taken up rather than having like all of this black space. Maybe the lighting is too strong, like too high a contrast, too much of a difference between like this lit area. But I guess it raises the question, like if you're going to go for the style of making this look like a photo of a painting rather than a render, then can maybe go all the way with that and actually make it a photo, like in a scene surrounded by other stuff. But overall, like, I like the experimental style of it. Next up, we have XRevV with something which I think is still kind of following their usual style, because I've seen a lot of your artwork, and I feel like with this one, you're still kind of within that comfort zone of these displaced head artworks. So I'm really interested in seeing what you would be able to do differently, like a different style of artwork, maybe something more environmental. But this is still quite cool. You know, I like these kind of vertebraic details, if that's even a word. If not, I've made it up. And also the kind of red foggy background there, the energetic eyes, but it does feel like maybe too much has been relied on in terms of like displacement. If we go back and have a look at your other artworks quickly, you know, it's all kind of, again, like I said, within that general comfort zone of displaced heads. So I want to see you like apply it to something slightly different. Like I want to see an environment from you or something someday, just to see what that would look like, you know, for the sake of curiosity. But again, yeah, you know, it's quite a nice one. I really like the lighting around it. You've got some really nice depth of field going there as well. It's like, you know how to do these ones quite well. So thank you for submitting. And lastly, we have Zam. I find this one really interesting because you have this disturbing sculpted style. It's almost like a carbonized, distressed human, but the expression is disturbing. It seems like something that you might find in, you know, Elden Ring, because I don't really find too many games, films, or other media doing this disturbing style. It is like a very From Software kind of thing to do, you know, very kind of Dark Soulsy, but I appreciate it. I want to see more unnerving yet detailed stuff like this. Weird human expressionism in a dark form, something that I think Cryo Chamber would probably like. The only thing is though, like, despite this really interesting carbonization, it just cuts off into nothing with the body, which I think is a bit of a shame. Like, I feel like that should be continued, perhaps with even more figures as well, maybe even some extra environment context going on. I just feel like it's a really good detailed start, but there needs to be more around it. I imagine this is also done through some kind of randomized displacement, but that doesn't necessarily matter too much. I think you're onto something that just needs to be more. But again, an interesting style to explore. I don't think many people would kind of latch onto something like that, so very interesting. So I think that's all of the entries looked at for this one. Hopefully I haven't missed someone out, although it's very possible that happened. Again, like I said, there are a few things which I don't know whether to consider specifically for the challenge, like RenderRides, lovely artwork there, or Emarco's video that we took a look at. But even separate from that, I feel like probably first place I would give to Donna, because they put a really good amount of sculpting and like texture painting effort into this, so really appreciated that one. I think Marton's rather cinematic one here was also quite impressive. You know, I like the detail they put into it. The slightly storytelling element as well. Barry and Larry, I thought that was quite funny. But I also like the framing of some of these shots, because that is quite unnerving in a detailed way. You know, it's kind of like looking into... I went to an exhibition at the Natural History Museum once for like Creatures from the Abyss, and it was very freaky. It was all like a very, very dark exhibition and really atmospheric, and it kind of like, you'll see a lot of things like that in there. I wonder if there are any images of that actually. Let me see. Many images. That doesn't look like the one I went to. I mean, this was like quite many years ago now, but yeah, there were a lot of like, you know, freaky things hanging around. And even I think in the archival sections of the Natural History Museum, there are a lot of things suspended in formaldehyde and other substances. I like this one. It's interesting and quite well executed. And also, though a lot of the images have been interesting, I did also really like Hili's one, this underwater scene, though there are some things which could be improved in terms of like the environmental detail. This one, in terms of like a sudden scare, I did actually find more unnerving than, say, like the jump scare from Emarco's, even though it is very quick, you know. I did quite like that. But again, like the other artworks are quite lovely as well. Although then again, you know, August's one, pretty good with that element of noticing something after the fact. Although again, like the environment is quite, I don't want to say generic for like 3D nature renders, but still feels like maybe it's a bit lacking. So yeah, I'll make a decision and then I'll put that up in the Discord Hall of Fame channel, and then I'm sure you will see who the winners are. And then again, I may have announced them at the same time as releasing this video, so you probably already know. But yeah, thank you for submitting, everyone. It's been an interesting challenge. I really like Halloween, so these have been very cool. Hopefully you found this interesting, and if you made it to the end, of course, maybe put like a paintbrush emoji in the comments. Seems like quite an appropriate one, or maybe even a pumpkin. So yeah, thanks for watching, everyone. Stay safe, and I will see you next time.